There are weeks where you sort of get caught up in doing your own little thing and never get outside of it. And there are weeks which, in a way, catch the whole sweep of your existence. This past week has been one of those. For personally, it's been a very exciting week, for it gave me a wide range of the vision of what I would call my pastoral ministry. For it began with a long, hard look with a wild group of college-age young people on the prophets, where we spent 13 hours reading and studying and discussing. It was shared with you on a Sunday morning service, and as part of that enthusiasm of dealing with these young people, it was kept in balance by the fact that the fathers and the mother of two of our people passed away. And the pastoral responsibility to shift gears from the enthusiasm of learning moved to translate that into the words of comfort and to share with an individual who, knowing that this was coming, still had to make some decisions of faith. And that was sandwiched as I talked with both of these women and their families between the opportunity of being on Kelly and Company. I can only reflect, before I reflect for a moment on that when I was called and asked, the one thing the woman said was, "I've asked other ministers, but they've refused. Why are you willing to come on?" And I said, "Because I have the support of my congregation." Now, I did not know to what extent that went. But Jim Nish and Don Manning and Dave Welcome all arranged somehow or another to get home or to a television to watch the program. Doris Monroe took one with her to work, set it up on the desk. And all day long from people in the congregation came calls saying, "Thank you for being on and doing that." And so we shared in that sense the dimension of the faith. We continued on with some personal kinds of things that came along, an opportunity to sit in on a corporation meeting and listen to them their conversation back and forth about the problems of communication and of trust and of reaching out to each other. A chance to share with good friends, to sit around the dinner table and to talk about the problems that other churches have been facing and what they might do with it. A chance to reach out in a wide variety of ways that shows that the dimension of faith is not limited to a 10:30 Sunday morning service, but just crackles out to every aspect of our life. And as I reflected upon it, I thought this has been a good week. Not because the events have all been good, but because for me personally, the sharing with so many people in so many ways has said, God is active in our lives. Now, part of the fun of the last week was working with the young people. And you'll remember that we started a series of sermons about 3 or 4 weeks ago talking about a wide range of backgrounds to the understanding of Jesus. We moved to Paul and his beautiful sermon on Mars Hill, or the Areopagus, where he was talking at that particular point to the Greeks, and we studied the Stoics to understand what they were doing. We studied the Epicureans and talked about their understanding of life and contrasted it with our own understanding and that of the Bible. We moved into a disastrous sermon, which I still will take full blame for, talking about the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Good materials, but it never quite got together. Last week we began what was to be the final sermon, but somehow or another I never got beyond the introduction. It grew out of understanding the meaning in life of God as seen through the biblical dimension. You will remember that in our conversation when we were talking about the prophetic backgrounds to Jesus, and I had mentioned that Jesus has more of the prophet Isaiah applied to him than any other portion of Scriptures. He draws his strength and understanding of his mission, of his life, of his task from that portion of the Scriptures called Isaiah. That he began his public ministry, according to the Gospels, by reading a message from the prophet Isaiah. Now that's about as far as I got, but I wanted to show what he read. It's from the 61st chapter. The Spirit of the Lord Yahweh has been given to me, for Yahweh has anointed me. Remember that Yahweh is the biblical name for God. Most translations put the Lord in there, but actually most scholars now hold that it was actually pronounced Yahweh and that we ought to see it in that sense. The Spirit of Lord Yahweh, the Spirit of God's holiness, has been given to me, for Yahweh has anointed me. He's made me a Messiah. Now that's as far as we got. Remember? Wake up. If I hadn't looked around, you'd have been gone.
We've got to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, I'm going to... We never got any beyond that because we talked about how each one of us have the opportunity when we work under God to be anointed by God to do His will. And that's what a Messiah is, one who does the will of God by working out in his life, in her life, in the life of those around him, God's will. And he's anointed by the Spirit of God, which comes down. And we talked at great length about the challenge that each one of us faces in our everyday life to make decisions not only on the basis of what we feel might be good for ourselves, but upon a commitment to God, and to balance those things. And we know that the Messiah, the Christ, as an understanding, was a term used not only significantly of Jesus, but of a wide range of other individuals, including the non-Jew Persian King Cyrus the Great, who was called, according to Isaiah, God's anointed one, God's Christ. And that it's an opportunity for each of us, as we understand the biblical dimension of faith, to become truly Christians, anointed ones of God, operating with God active in our lives and stepping forward with His Spirit. Now, I was reading this with the kids the other day, and we had some who had come in ready to really cut my throat. But we got to this about 7 o'clock at night. And by that time, we were having too much fun to cut anybody's throat. We were just exploring some things together. And I said to them, let's read this next line. He has sent me to bring good news to the poor. I asked the kids, what does good news mean? What do you think it means? What is the good news? The gospel. Wait a minute, one of the young men said, good news must be a bad translation. I said, no, it's not a bad translation. Go back and look at it and study it. We have within the record of Isaiah itself the promise of God upon each of us that we are obligated to bring the gospel, the good news. The Greek term used in the Greek translation here is exactly the same term used in the New Testament. That is, the gospel of God is the good news of God in our lives. For upon each of us, as we understand the meaning of gospel, falls the obligation to share what God means. And upon each of us falls the obligation to walk in the newness of life. For the Gospels and the prophets are technically one ongoing continuation. And I'm not going to go into all the technical details here, but I'd be glad to at some great length with a Bible class at some point when we take up these kinds of questions. There is a continuation between the growing message of the prophets who, seeing God in life, talk about God's Spirit working upon us, the Spirit of His holiness settling upon us so that we become truly His anointed, and then proclaim the good news that God is active in our lives. The same proclamation made by Jesus, as you know, throughout all of the Gospels. For Jesus proclaimed, preached the gospel of the reign of God. And we've talked about this, and I don't want to pause too long because it's a familiar theme, and most of you have been through it with me. But the fact of the matter is that when you read the New Testament, when you read the Gospels, when you read the proclamations of Jesus, there is a continuing spirit that the whole background is that Jesus Himself said that the gospel is the proclamation of the good news that God is active in our lives and the reign of God in our lives. But the prophets, as they began to see, saw that there was always something that went beyond this, that this was only the beginning point. To recognize God in life as an intellectual and perhaps even an emotional thing, but it doesn't mean an awful lot until it becomes active. Until we allow God to so fill us that we begin to reach out into others, it is nothing but a very small, short little beginning. Because in every single case where Jesus and where the prophets are talking about this, they always move forward. The Spirit of Yahweh is upon me, for Yahweh has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the poor, to bind up the hearts that are broken, to proclaim liberty to captives, freedom to those in prison, to proclaim a year of favor from Yahweh, a day of a vengeance for our God, to comfort those who mourn, to give them for ashes a garland. Does it sound a little bit like the Beatitudes? For a mourning robe, the oil of gladness, for despondency, praise. For you see, when God touches our lives and we allow Him to reign, we begin to reach out with a newness of life, where the prophetic message and the message of Jesus, who was called in Matthew the prophet from Nazareth, comes through and boils out over us and causes us to totally react in a different way to every segment of our society. What are some of the things that are the backgrounds that you find, not only in the themes of the prophets, but also in terms of Jesus? Aside from this message of the gospel, which is a prophetic message applying from at least 800 BC onward, where God's reign and rule in life is going on. Well, there are a number of themes, and I'd like to cover very quickly some of them, not going into depth, but just see it as sort of a montage of a background of what Jesus was working with. There was a period of time in the history of the world where people accepted responsibility not for themselves, but for everybody else. It's not too unfamiliar now. It's easy to accept responsibility for somebody else, you see, because that's really can be easily snuffed off, and we all do it. Oh, my poor child, it's my fault. Or, oh, my poor husband, it's my fault. Or, he failed because it's my fault. Or, if I'd only done this. The fact of the matter is that the prophetic message is that you can't accept responsibility for somebody else. You bear the responsibility of your own good and bad. It is a theme that weaves itself throughout the prophets. Ezekiel, for example, says, the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. That is, the sins of the father are visited to the children. But he also adds, no more shall this be said in Israel. For he goes on to argue that those who do good shall have good upon them, and those who do evil shall have evil upon them, and everybody will bear the responsibility of their own actions. And as you listen to the gospel of Jesus as he's talking about it, there is a continuing plea not to go through an outward ritual which does not have any effect whatsoever in life, but to bear the responsibility of your own actions. It's a familiar theme and important. Ezekiel also points out that there's a difference between a personal responsibility and a moral and spiritual or psychological responsibility. He talks about a watchman being up and seeing the armies coming and shouting warning. He is not personally responsible for that army coming or not coming, but he does have a moral responsibility to call people to alert. And I think one of the things that too many people, particularly in the so-called liberal churches, do is they're willing to anguish over the needs of the poor and the widow, and remember that the prophets, as we said before, over and over again, judge the value of religion on how you handle and treat those who are less fortunate than you. What you do with the jails, what you do with the widow, back in a day when there were no such things as Social Security and benefit payments. what you did with the orphan who was left oftentimes alone to starve to death in many civilizations, and how you reached out in your godly giving manner to help those individuals to come not only to the physical but to the moral and spiritual and intellectual fullness of life. The value of religion in the prophetic word over and over again in Amos and Isaiah and in Jeremiah is precisely that you are judged on the basis of handling those who are less fortunate than you. Frightening and shocking when you look at that, because most of us are willing to have people who have more than we do give it to us and don't see that we have the obligation to continue on. Interesting sidelight, has nothing to do with it, but it kind of shows. And growing out of the discussion of this meeting on Friday, one individual was talking about that the boss had absolute control. You didn't say no to a boss. You all know bosses like that, right? I am the boss. I am your father. You will do what I tell you. Don't ask any questions about it or I'll knock you across the room. I have a little bit of a tendency that way once in a while, but I give the kid a break. I count to 5. He can go up to 4 without getting whopped, but if he gets beyond 4, he's in serious trouble. And he can know how irked I am by whether I start at 1, 2, 3, or 4. When I say 4, he's gone. He knows he has no options at that point. If I'm a little bit, I give him 2 and 3 before I get there. And if I'm not really too much and I'm sort of playing with him a little bit, I do 1, 2, that kind of a thing. I'm a little bit like that. There's certain things he's got an option on, certain things he doesn't. We understand that all the way through. But this individual was very strong that if a boss said something to you, you did it without any questions. Now, the implication was never spelled out. That is, I got people working for me too, you see. And I don't want them questioning my orders. This individual knew fully that if you demanded that and gave that to somebody above you, you had the right to demand it to somebody who was working under you. He understood it. He spelled it out very carefully without saying it, particularly because some of those who were going to be working under him or with him were sitting there, you see. That was his approach, and that's why he could demand, because he was consistent with it. Well, we all understand that a little bit, but the idea to be found in the prophets is that over and over and over and over and over again that you have a responsibility, not added privilege, not added benefits, but a responsibility by your godliness to reach out to those who don't have, to share with those who are in need, intellectually, morally, spiritually, physically. If we judge Christianity for the most part on how we treat others, we'd have a pretty sad thing. And I've asked you from this pulpit time and time again, if you had to judge Christianity and become a Christian on the basis of your own actions, would you become a Christian? Do you see within your own life the dynamic of difference of the rule of God that separates you somehow or another from others? That enables you to overcome the adversities, to put them in a proper perspective, to feel the burden, the sense of loss, but at the same time to bear up and to understand it? Does your life, in a very real sense, if we're talking about the impact of God in our life and the preaching of good news to the poor and the healing of the sick and all of that in terms of our spiritual upheavals, does your life so speak so loudly that others are attracted to it? Does anybody ever ask you if you go to church and say to you, there's something about you so different, where do you go and how do you do it and what makes it? Probably not, because one of the things that I think most of us have learned is that religion has become such a matter of status quo that nobody even worries about it anymore. Very few people care whether or not you go to church, and if they do, that's your business and they don't want to talk about it, because after all, we don't discuss politics and religion. The most deadly disease of all. Since we don't discuss politics and religion, they're over and above the moral commitments of life and stand outside and make no difference. You discuss important things, don't you? The safety of cars, salary, taxes, 3 martini lunches. Why in God's earth can't we discuss the moral dimensions of life? Why in God's earth do we have to? Because somehow or another we're afraid that people will get angry, refuse to raise the moral dimension. One of the nice things about the thing on Kelly and Company was that in spite of the fact that they did everything in their power to set up an antagonism, you know, Dr. Jack Van Impe and Martha Jean the Queen, born-again Christians, and a local minister who disputes it all. Ooh, I sat back there when I heard that, and I sort of shivered, and Martha Jean said, oh, I feel like I'm going into the lion's den. You know, what are you going to do to us? She's sort of like this, you know. In spite of all of the efforts to build up a hostility, when we got through, we were all talking easily and well together. Even Dr. Van Impe, who had to leave quickly, came up and took my hand, and we chatted for a moment. Because there is a recognition that there is a need in life for people who are struggling with the understanding of what it means to allow God to reign in your life, to get together and to talk about it, to explore it. Not professional Christians, but people who have the desire to serve God. Oh, I get together with ministers. It's a bore. I hate ministers' meetings. I hate them with a passion. I have to say this. I go for the coffee and tea and sit through the rest of it just so I can have some fun talking to them. But they're a bore because, you see, ministers are professionals. That's all but me, quote unquote. And they've got to have their own little thing, and they're also extremely egotistical. That is not, you notice I didn't quote that from me, that's true. You notice that, yes. All ministers are extremely egotistical. They have to be. They stand up there week after week after week proclaiming God, and seldom get anybody proclaiming anything back at them. So you begin to get a feeling, you know. You get on a roll. Things are going your way. For 25 years I've said this and nobody's ever disagreed with me. Therefore, you know, they are the center in many churches. It's only in this church that the pyramid goes from the minister this way. Most churches that go that way, you see. So they get to a point where they don't talk seriously because they don't want to show their ignorance. Now, the nice thing about talking with people who are struggling is that they admit that they are ignorant. Every question is not for me to answer. I attempt to do so. If I attempt to do so, I show my ignorance. Teach thy tongue to say, I do not know, is a Talmudic proverb. I usually pick on teachers at this point, but I won't today. But the greatest teachers are those who can say to you, I don't know, let's find out together. The greatest pastor is one who can say to you, I don't know, but we find it out together. The greatest church and congregation can say, I don't understand the full reign of God in my life, but let's find it out together. And commitment, what a lost term. What a lost term. Where is our commitment today? We talked about it with Dave and Sue, a commitment being made to God, a commitment being made to each other, a commitment being made to this church, a commitment to bear responsibility and to support. But where is there in today's world where commitment means anything? For everybody will tell you a contract is merely time bought, that no contract is valid, all of them can be broken, that you set it up in terms of an intention, but you know that if you have to, you can get out of it. Where is the commitment that what I pledge to do, I will follow through even if it doesn't remain easy or pleasurable? Where is the commitment under God in terms of marriage, that because I have committed myself to God and to a partner, I make it work, even when the going is rough? Where's the commitment of parents or of children to the parents? And where's the commitment to realize that I can do my own thing, but that does not mean self-destruction? Yet in the prophetic message and in the message of Jesus, there is a concept of duty and commitment, particularly to God. Remember Ezekiel? The weird things that he would do, lying on the ground on one side for 180 days to signify certain things about life. When his wife died, he didn't mourn to signify that there would be so much death and destruction in the land that one would lose the capability of mourning over one. Isaiah, who went through a very strange period in his life where he wandered for 3.5 years without clothes. Madmen in one sense of the word, for in today's world we would lock them up for, quote, their own good. And yet their commitment to God was willingness to even be considered mad. And their duty came out. We have moral and spiritual and psychological concerns for other people, but they are sharpened only when they're sharpened under God. We have a need to begin to work out our commitments to one another, but they are sharpened only when they're sharpened under God. I've told this story before, but in a sense, maybe it highlights for me many things. I use it now all the time when I'm talking with young couples to get married. You'll hear the story again. You're all looking to see who's there, aren't you? See, I did it sort of general. Now the burgers are sitting there saying, "We're married, we got 3 kids are here," you know. Front row people right here, okay? Peter and Pam coming up in 2 weeks, nearly 3 weeks, almost, okay? I told you one time about a group of ministers and their wives being together, and a guy had read a paper about a theological dimension of marriage in which he had tried to establish that marriage was meant between one man and one woman for all time, and that's all there was to it. And the entire paper, he never mentioned any scripture or anything else, but quoted all the sociological facts. Now, being a little bit of a bummer, I said at the end of his excellent paper, which was a beautiful sociological interpretation of marriage from a given point of view, what is the theological dimension of marriage? And he could not answer that. Other than in vague terms, marriage was created by God and all of that. On the way home, Chris, my wife, I think spelled it out for me in the best way. Is she here? She was still... Huh? Did she come in? You seen her? She was leaving right after me. It just dawned on me. How's that for concern? You know, I mean, that's real. Sorry. Just dawned on me. I hadn't seen her. You know, she's usually up here in the choir, and when I twist around, she's one of those that glares at me. But she's a little running. Oh, okay. I'm glad you saw her. Thanks. On the way home, I asked her the same question, and she said, "Well, for me, there are times when I can't stand you. But my commitment to our togetherness under God eases me over those periods." She said, "It's no longer even a commitment to you. I need something